Good afternoon and welcome to the second edition of Insurance Europe's webinar series Cover Notes. With Cover Notes, we showcase people and topics that make the news in the insurance world, and I am delighted to have with us today two very well-known figures in the climate debate. First, let me warmly welcome Philippe Lamberts, who has been an MEP since 2009 and is the co-president of the Greens Group in the European Parliament. And he is joined in debate by Christian Mumenthaler, Group CEO of Swiss Re, and he is in this position since 2016. You can find their full bios on the webinar platform if you are interested. And a warm welcome to both of you, Philippe and Christian. It's great to have you with us. And as you know, today we wanted really to discuss the COP26 outcomes. There were high expectations for COP26 in Glasgow and much debate afterwards whether these expectations have been met. So what is your own assessment of COP26 now that the dust has settled a little bit? Was it a success? Was it a failure? Was it needed at all? So maybe, Philippe, if you wanted to start, that would kick us off nicely.
Thank you. Well, welcome everyone, and I'm glad to be here. I always found during my experience as an MEP that reinsurers have a tendency to be natural allies of the Greens because, well, ultimately they have to pay the consequences of inaction, notably on the issue of climate, but not only. This said, COP is a disappointment. Well, not so much because I expected a lot, but because the whole United Nations process is not delivering at the speed and with the intensity that it needs to deliver. And of course, the United Nations are no global government, and so we have to make do with the kind of global governance we have right now. But as Sexgen Antonio Guterres rightfully said, we are still on a track to close to 3 degrees Celsius global warming, where the goal set in Paris was 1.5. So no, we did not, well, some technical work was done, but if you ask me, was there the sense of urgency that we need to have when the house is burning? My answer is no.
Okay, that was a very clear statement. Thank you very much, Philippe. Christian, do you agree?
I will, so yes, but I will try to take a slightly more positive view, and maybe that's because my expectations were even lower going in. But I think compared to other years, I could clearly see a much broader consensus around the problem. And I think the fact, so COP26, it was very important. I think it's a crystallization point in time where you have certain peer pressure. We don't have anything better than that peer pressure, and a lot of governments had to come up with new revised plans. So it's another step in the right direction, and I don't think it's slowing. I actually think it's accelerating. So now it depends. Of course, it's not enough. We all know that, but at least there's much more momentum. I think a few COPs back, it was just a bunch of experts talking, and Europe, going ahead, and the rest not. I think what is still remaining is a lot of these pledges are not backed by very strong plans. And I think a lot of countries are really afraid of the transition because they don't see how practically they will make the way. So they intellectually understand we need to do the transition. I think that is sort of much broader now than in the past. But I think the how is much more in the foreground and is holding people back.
So we have two views, a little bit glass half full, glass half empty, depending on probably your expectation, and also is then in the end the UN system really geared towards producing the results? I think a very valid question. My own take would be it's probably of all the bad systems we have still the one that is driving the debate forward. But let's look maybe in more detail. At COP26, we had representatives of all sectors, private and public. There is also the question, is this what is really needed? Can we make progress, each of us alone? Or isn't it, ultimately the recipe to have everybody, civil society, the public authorities, the private sector there discussing and trying to really advance on the topic. Maybe Christian, you want to go first this time?
Yeah, I think it's important for people to know COP26 is for the governments. They are leading this, they are negotiating, they are representing everybody. So while I went there to support, not to have any particular special voice, and just to show that there are, hundreds, if not thousands of businesses who support this and who want to put pressure on. And I talked to several delegates and asked them honestly, is it useful for us to be here? And at least they were maybe too polite, but they said it's very helpful because it helps them to say this whole thing about businesses against that and it's going to destroy the economy is not true. There's all these companies out there who are here to support the process. So that's what we tried to do. I mean, obviously business has to do a lot on our own, and we're part of civil society. But in the end, the COP is around the governments, and we clearly said we need the price for carbon, we need end of subsidies to dirty energy, etc., etc. So I think it's just important that this voice is also heard, and it's not. There's the other businesses also out there who are very loud, against the progress. They're much less loud these years. So I hope we could contribute a little bit to the debate.
And Philippe, from your perspective, is this useful to have these different voices?
Well, of course, we will not succeed in system change if all stakeholders are not participating. That's obvious. But indeed, I totally agree what you just said. This is for governments. I mean, these conferences are for governments, and it is for governments to decide targets and rules. And indeed, within that framework set by governments, then private players have to play their role. Now, it's always good that political decision makers consult with all sorts of stakeholders, but everyone should be reminded of its place. I mean, when you are a policymaker, you have to defend and promote the general interest, whereas if you're the CEO of a private company, your duty, and I'm afraid that's maybe narrow-minded, but the reality is that the last decades, the duty has been perceived as satisfy your shareholders, whatever they ask. And I would also agree with the fact that it's not like there's the business world. There's so much diversity there. And indeed, we have ugly people. I remember I was at the Summer University of the French MEDEF, so the employers organization, and there you had the leader of the oil sector within MEDEF who said, well, basically we want the governments to maintain the integrity of our cash flow. So basically he was pleading for the continuation of fossil fuel subsidies. But I heard other people saying other stuff, that they wanted to engage in the transition, and they recognize indeed that there has to be a big change. So the business world is diverse, and there I would say it's good that indeed we have support from some business quarters on fighting climate change, because believe me, those in the policy circles that resist the most change are also the ones who are the most attuned to the voices from business. So if some voices in business start to say now significant change is warranted, it's good because it helps the cause, of course. But then again, we should not just say that all businesses embrace the transition. That is simply not true. Many of them believe that we should enjoy the party pressing the lemon of the planet, and when the party is over, it's over. And as we say in French, après moi les mouches, I don't care about the future generations. There are people like that in business as well.
Yeah. And of course, we have all had also examples of the latter, but then looking forward, and let's look at the specific commitments that were made also, in particularly now at COP26. Philippe, when you look at the public sector commitments, we know, of course, there's an EU agenda, but even in the EU, which is generally considered to be, certainly the region in the world that is driving, action on fighting climate change. There are huge differences in commitment between member states. Now, how already in the EU can we make sure that nobody is left behind and that we develop plans, to move forward and make the whole concerted joint action really work?
Well, first, one might say that Europe's leadership on climate in the previous decennia was a bit fake, because the most we did actually was to displace our CO2 emissions outside of the European Union. Because if you take into account imported CO2 emissions, actually Europe did not do a lot. Of course, others were worse. But then again, you have to be careful when you claim leadership. Now it's different, I would say, because with the European Green Deal, with the -55 target, which is now written down in law, and much stricter interpretations of what that means, I was proud at the COP26 that indeed Europe at least was a jurisdiction that came to the table with increased commitments. Maybe not increased enough, but legally binding increased commitments. Now, we have to make them happen. And it's easier said than done, because science says we should do -65 by 2030, but to be entirely honest, I don't even know how we will get to -55, because that will be hard enough. Now, indeed, some member states are dragging their feet. I would say even some regions. I'm from Belgium. The Flanders, which is very much fossil dependent, is finding the targets too high. But indeed, you see that in some quarters in Europe there's resistance. But by and large, now we see a commitment to go. Well, we can criticize the Polish government for many things, but at least on climate, there has been a marked evolution of the Polish government. So what we need in order to make it happen is solidarity between member states, including financial solidarity. This is about the Just Transition Fund, which is not big enough. There will be also another climate social fund coming, but to me the example to look at is really the European Next Gen EU Recovery Fund. It's still a tiny instrument, 750 billion, but if well done, it can serve as a prototype of what we might do tomorrow in order to fight climate change. It's an instrument that has yet to be fully proven, but if proven, will provide us with the basis of bringing all the 27 member states together. That's what we did for COVID. And climate is even bigger a threat than COVID. So if we could do it for COVID, I think we can do it for climate as well, but the prototype must fly. And so the proof will be in tasting the pudding. And there I was talking with Italian officials earlier today. Italy will be key, because if the mass of money going to Italy and also to other member states is seen as well spent, then indeed in the so-called frugal countries, there might be more opening up to repeat the operation. But if this recovery fund is seen as wasted money, despite the climate objectives that are inside the constraints of the recovery plan, then I fear that indeed there won't be a second try.
Very interesting points. Christian, would you like to react directly on that? We had just a discussion before you joined, Philippe. Maybe that would lend itself now to also feedback directly from you, Christian. And then I follow up with a more insurance-related question, maybe.
So I think the reason I'm a bit more optimistic, having been 10 years in this field, is that I think the common belief is today much stronger that we're in front of a huge decarbonization wave, massive. So that's the new business reality. So everybody, whether they're in it or not, they know this is the reality and they start to adapt. And some of it will be costly because, you have enormous investments in the beginning, and let's say green steel, green concrete, things like that. These products can be produced, but they will be much more expensive than the current ones in the beginning, before you go through the efficiency curve. And so to me, it's obvious that the richer countries and the richer companies need to lead. You need leadership here. You need some people to go in front of others. You cannot ask people who have no money to lead, okay? So I think we need to lead. Obviously, the companies, we need to do our bit. But in terms of Europe, and I guess I'm Swiss, but I'm also Italian, so I speak as an Italian. in Europe, I'm still missing a bit the overall plan, because we talk about every country makes their own plan, but if you think about Europe, and if, for example, one of the more obvious elements must be solar energy, there's places where this is much better than other places. I know south of Italy very well, this is an ideal place for solar, but this would mean, a lot of money going in, a lot of investment, and of course you need the permits, and then you need to find a way to store it, so you need to agree on what it is. Is it ammonia? Is it hydrogen? What is it? There's enough options open, and then you need to have the whole logistics to bring it to other countries like Germany or Switzerland, where this is then used, and you need then to transform it back into energy. So I think we need to hear the broad population, the business, everybody needs to hear what's the plan? What can we do? What is realistic, and not just country by country plan? And I think once you do that, there's tremendous opportunities. People will see opportunities. Business will see opportunities. Countries will see opportunities. So I think we need to pass this finger pointing and so on. We need to start to get into the action. We need to see, okay, what is it? And Europe is rich. I mean, for this kind of problem, there should be enough money. And there are solutions that are feasible, but they need courage and investments.
Totally agree with that.
Okay, this is good. Then let's maybe focus in, Christian, a little bit more on what the private insurance sector can commit to and what is actually done. When you look at your own business, investment underwriting side of the business, how do you see that developing, and what can you actually concretely do?
So I think ideally, in my view, every company should commit to this net zero 2050 and then make a plan there and have ambitious intermediary goals for 2030. And obviously not all insurers have done that at this stage. Then typically the own footprint can be optimized, but it's very small compared to scope 3. And so the much bigger leverage is through the asset side and the underwriting side. On the asset side, there's an alliance of a lot of insurers and pension funds, this Net Zero Insurance Alliance, led by the UN, which is massive. And they have committed to, and we have committed to, decarbonize the assets, which means that there's a pathway where we can put pressure, or we're in dialogue with lots of companies, telling them we can only invest in you if you are on a path to net zero 2050. And so you create pressure through that. On the underwriting side, it's much more difficult because we don't have yet a method of how to measure the carbon footprint of an insurance contract. We're working on it. There's the Net Zero Insurance Alliance, led by AXA in this case. Work on it is much more delicate because there's some competitive law issues in it. So we need to have lots of lawyers around it to make sure there's no negative side effect to that. But the intent, I think, is very pure, and it's to say, how can we measure it? And once you measure it, it's the same commitment, net zero by 2050. So you have to decarbonize everything you insure by then. I hope that we have some results this year, but I hope that within 1 or 2 years the method is established, and then I think everybody should report on that, and you start to get a virtuous cycle where people start to put pressure much more significantly on it. So I think there's a lot the insurance industry can do.
Okay, well, thanks very much for this dive in. I don't know, Philippe, whether you want to come in or ask questions on that. If just maybe briefly wait for your reaction.
No, I'm glad that at least some in the insurance sector are looking at the contribution they can make. But of course, the insurance industry is sitting on massive funds. I know that there have been some issues with insurance regulations as to actually we were maybe not driving enough towards long-term investment, whereas this is the natural investment for the insurance industry. But I think that the way the insurance industry invests its money is really crucial. Of course, it's not the only industry, but it's a big chunk of the financial sector. And it's important indeed if the insurance sector is driving its own investments towards a transition, because as you said, Christian, Europe is rich. It's not an issue of do we have the means. If anyone, well, we have them. But the question is, do we have the political will to invest there? Because indeed, this is about patient money. Because indeed, short term, doing things the dirty way or the unjust way contributes more to the bottom line. Whereas doing them in a smart way, in a sustainable way. Short term requires more investment, but long term probably will provide a more stable flow of profits. But the issue that we have is about patience. I mean, usually when you use the word investor, you associate that with people who are putting in money for profits in the future. But actually, more and more what we see, and maybe not so much in the insurance part of the business, but in the rest of the financial sector, is people who are investors in name only. I mean, what they want is a quick buck. It's not really invest, because investing means risk. And insurers are good at managing risk, maybe the banking sector much less so, because they count on the taxpayer to rescue them. But there, indeed, I think that the insurance sector has a key role to play in order to drive more the financial sector towards a long-term view. And there, of course, legislation has a great deal to do in order to drive the sector towards a more long-term way of looking at the economy.
Yeah, and I think if I may very briefly, that is exactly why we are hoping to get this recognition of our industry and frankly also our business model, that we have the potential to be a patient long-term investor, and that is recognized also more in our supervisory and prudential treatment. And we have the Solvency II review now underway, and let's hope that we get the right outcome. Now let's move on maybe to the issue of COP26 and whether or not it has done enough for the adaptation debate. And maybe first question to you, Christian, what is the best way to draw on the insurance industry's expertise here? Because our expertise goes back, we have certainly worked on adaptation issues for decades. Can we have your view on that?
Yeah, so we published, I look back in view of the question, and we published 2009 a publication around adaptation in the climate field, because we felt it's too late for certain side effects anyway, and it's a whole methodology of how to assess the climate risk of a city, for example, or a state, what to look for, and where to invest the limited money to get the best, in adaptation. So it's a whole topic on its own. It's more a question of also social justice and the rich countries and so on. So it's a very political process. I'm sure Philippe has much more views around that, because there's the talk that also COP27 will be much more around adaptation. So this is going to be interesting. I'm worried that we switch already too much to adaptation. I really want us to fix the basic issue to a certain extent. And I know there's some parallelity between the two, but I really want to focus on what's the plan? How we decarbonize the whole industry? It's a gigantic plan. We need to share much more what it means. We need to share much more what avenues we have, what ideas we have. There's a lot of ideas, but they're not shared. And there's a lot of things moving, but again, it's not shared. So I'm always a bit nervous in this debate. It's versus, and I think we are definitely not there yet with our plans. So if we just do adaptation in the back, we can do adaptation for the next 1,000 years, because it's not changing. But maybe that's more my emotion around that. So I think it's very important. But let's make sure we also focus on the primary issue. We get out the fire and then we repair the house.
Philippe, your views on adaptation?
I would agree with that. Yet we know that for some countries, the house is already so much burnt that indeed we need to talk about adaptation, and that is true. But indeed, also, I would say almost politically, actually, diverting the debate to adaptation confirms the wish of some in the real economy that, well, as long as we can pay for the destruction that we cause, we are okay. But actually, we cannot allow further destruction to happen. And of course, climate is a phenomenon with a big inertia. So a lot of destruction is already underway. We saw that in all parts of the world during the summer, including in rich and cozy Europe, where more than 200 people died of floods in developed countries like Belgium and Germany. So destruction is going on. But indeed, the primary mission is to quell the fire. And there we are not there yet. And again, if Europe is leading, well, where were the commitments of China, of the United States, of India, of the major economic powers on the planet? Europe is the only one to really take it seriously. But then again, I think it's a smart decision. You know, some people might see that as, okay, we are hurting ourselves by doing that. But my deep belief is that Europe can lead in this revolution. And actually, when you come to think of it in terms of global competitiveness, I would say that if Europe cannot lead this revolution, I don't know what other game is in town, because by and large, we can say about the digital transformation in Europe as well. But we have to realize that leading positions have already been taken in that world. Yet when it comes to the transformation, the green transformation of our economy, leading position still can be conquered. And well, I like Europe very much. It's a very nice place to be. It can be the museum of the rest of the world. But, you know, being basically a tourist attraction does not provide for a high living standards economy. And if we want to keep high living standards in Europe, we must be at the top in terms of value creation, and frankly speaking, again, leading on the green transformation is for Europe the only game in town.
Michele, if I can, I'd like to add, I'm just to underline this point, because I'm part of this alliance of over 100 CEOs who have committed to net zero 2050, and so I hear what other people are doing. So if European companies, and I think they're doing it now, they are investing now billions in the next years in creating green steel, green ammonium, for example, etc. And now it seems maybe crazy. It's a disadvantage. What are they doing? It's R&D money, etc. But assume that in 5 years, they're ready to deliver that at scale. In 5 years' time, the rest of the world will be woken up. A lot of companies around the world will say, we need to get to our own net zero. I need green steel. Well, there's just going to be the companies who have invested 5 years ago who can deliver it. And then suddenly it's going to reverse. It's going to be a massive competitive advantage if you can deliver that. Now, I wouldn't underestimate other countries. There are companies in China, there are companies in India, they absolutely see that. They will also invest in this. But I think that's how the business world is changing their thoughts. If you suddenly jump a few years, and then it's going to be the reverse. Those who can provide, you know, cleaner services. And I think it's I'm 100% sure this will come. This is not science fiction. It's so clear. The writing is on the wall. So I'm with Philippe. It's a great opportunity for the companies who run ahead.
Well, you have almost already responded to the last question I wanted to ask you, namely the global outlook and how optimistic you are about that. Maybe we can round up our discussion on this topic. You have already ventured into, you know, your thoughts on how can we make the rest of the world follow, and what are the triggers and drivers. So maybe I would invite you both for closing remarks around this topic. Philippe, you want to go first?
Well, I agree with Christian that indeed it's not that there are no Chinese companies or US companies moving. I do believe that from China, the potential destabilization of the power of the Communist Party by environmental destruction will make sure that indeed the Chinese Communist Party will take the bull by the horns and do whatever it takes to remain in power, and that is to green itself. There, it's out of political necessity that they will do it. I am more skeptical about the United States, because again, there are companies in the United States that are working on this, but I also see that when I look at the US Congress, I really doubt that there is a majority at the moment to pass ambitious environmental regulations, and we are seeing that as the Biden plan is being discussed, because by and large, the US Congress has been bought by private interests, and believe me, not necessarily the most progressive ones. We see that around coal, we see that around shale oil, we see that in many domains that the rent seekers of the systems have dug themselves into very strong positions in the US institutions. To some extent, you might say that the US Congress has been bought, and not by the best and brightest. And there I would really question the political willingness of a majority in the United States to really engage into that. Maybe they will do it when they see that their positions are threatened. But again, the logic of the quick buck that I was mentioning is nowhere the strongest than in the United States of America. So I am not sure that we are going to see much help short term from there. But indeed, Europeans should not be complacent, because you can call yourself leader and then just think that you are there, but actually it will now require huge investments, political investments, financial investments, material investments in Europe to make it happen. And if we don't do it now, as you said, Christian, 5 years from now, the opportunity window might be closed.
Thanks a lot, Philippe. Christian, your final statement on the topic?
Same point. We cannot. Same point. We cannot rest on the laurels. So Europe is leading from the ideas perspective and spirit, but not in action. And now we need to see the actions come through, because otherwise, I'm pretty sure China can overtake us. I know that Saudi Arabia, for example, is one of the leading countries when it comes to solar and transforming into ammonium. So they already have a few years advance of us in terms of technology. The US might be behind, but you know the incredible energy that they can unleash if necessary, and the speed and risk they're willing to take if need be. So I would not underestimate all of that. So I really think we need to get more common plan, common vision for Europe, where to go, how are we going to tackle it concretely, and then steer the investment flows a bit in that direction. And insurance can play a role, banks, everybody in the real economy will have to play a role.
Okay, well, thank you very much. For me, it was a very entertaining discussion. We managed to cover a lot of topics. And I really also like the fact that we started with the skepticism that was seen throughout, like a red line throughout the discussion, but still with this positive note at the end, we still can do. And we shouldn't rest on our laurels. And certainly, I think there is also the interest and the willingness of the European insurance sector to play our positive part and contribute to the best extent possible. I hope our audience has enjoyed listening to this exchange as much as I have enjoyed it. Thank you on behalf of everybody. Unfortunately, you can't hear the applause of the audience, but I hope you also enjoyed it. And have a very nice day. And with this, I close this very interesting cover note series for today. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Michaela.
A pleasure.
Thank you.